Believe it or not, 2026 is just around the corner, and this got me thinking about so many different representations of Jewishness that I've seen over this past year. Some of them were truly amazing, incredible, beautiful, heartwarming, and some, let's just say, they left what to be desired. And so in this episode of our Yiddish Kino Club, I want to take a look at 10 examples of movies, shows, and short films that captured Jewishness in 2025. Hi, if you're new here, my name is David, and here on Yiddishkeit, we take a look at the experience of Jewishness. Personally, I like to do that by analyzing Jewish history, culture, and art. And I'm really excited to go through this list with you since several of these movies and shows capture so many distinct Jewish cultures as well as central Jewish themes. And so, in no particular order, let's jump right into the first item on our list, which is a movie called Bad Shabbos. The movie follows an interfaith couple named David and Meg, who come to visit David's Jewish parents on the Upper West Side for Friday night dinner, while Meg's Christian parents are supposed to visit as well. At first, there's a lot of tension between Meg and David's mother, but without giving too much away, there's some shenanigans that go down and things go from tense to just pure chaos. I first found out about this movie randomly doing a Google search for like Jewish movies coming out. And a few months after that, a friend of mine actually went to go see it down in Florida. This movie did a festival run for about a year and had a theatrical release in 2025, and currently it's streaming basically everywhere. Also, this movie has several actors that also depict Jewishness in other movies. For example, David's father is played by David Paymer, who also plays Sophie Lennon's manager in the show Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Another character in this movie, the boyfriend Ben, is played by Ashley Zuckerman, who also plays another Jewish character in a show called Manhattan, where he is a Jewish physicist working on the atomic bomb at Los Alamos. And what's interesting is that his wife in the show is played by Rachel Brosnahan, who famously also plays Mrs. Maisel. In this movie, Ben's girlfriend, Abby, is played by Milana Weintraub, who also starred in another movie that takes place on Shabbos. In that one, it's about not being allowed to use electricity as well as an adult toy. So I guess if you go check it out, then discretion is advised. And Meg's mother from Wisconsin is played by Katherine Curtin, who also plays another character in a Jewish movie that came out this year, Yaniv, which we'll get to later on this list. And the final one I'll mention is that the doorman in this movie is played by Method Man, who also stars in another Jewish movie, which is Adam Sandler's The Cobbler.
It's Shabbos, baby.
Overall, I really enjoyed this movie. It was a super lighthearted comedy thriller.
That was the blessing. I feel like I was at the Wailing Wall.
It had a lot of really silly and funny moments. One of my favorites is where David's brother is trying to prove he knows Hebrew, and he starts like singing the Aleph Beis.
Aleph, Bet, Gimel,
Dalet,
Hey.
Sing it, Adam.
I am singing it.
And then it's Vav, right?
Yeah, Vav.
Wow, very good, Meg.
There's also a bunch of movie references, including a Serious Man reference that went over my head the first time, where they talk about Ron Meshbesher, if you know, you know. But more importantly, this movie deals with the theme of intermarriage, which plays out in the fact that although Meg is going to conversion classes, David's mother has a really hard time accepting her as part of the tribe.
It's like I have this house plant that was given to me by my mother that she got from her mother in Germany, who received it from her mother, who was given it by her mother, and so on for 100 generations.
It's a long time.
And now it feels like I'm handing this houseplant over to someone who took an online course in gardening.
Classes are in person.
There's also this beautiful moment at the end that I have to mention where Meg gives this Dvar Torah at the table, where she talks about this idea of doing a kindness for someone else. And in those type of moments, we can become an angel to them without even knowing it. All right, so speaking of intermarriage, this takes us to the next item on our list, which is, of course, the show Nobody Wants This. And it follows the story of a Reform rabbi named Noah, played by Adam Brody, who starts dating Joanne, played by Kristen Bell, who is a non-Jewish sex podcaster. In the first season, it was all about Noah and Joanne being accepted by Noah's family as well as Noah's temple. But in this season, as the relationship progressed, it becomes about Joanne's consideration whether she should convert to Judaism or not, as well as Noah's search to find a temple that suits his values. So, this show has gotten a lot of buzz over the past year or so, both positive and negative. To some, they really liked seeing Jewish representation on a big popular show on Netflix. But to others, they took issue with it, particularly the theme of intermarriage. For example, I saw this video essay by this channel called Mensch Sense, where he talks about how this show is similar to the movie The Jazz Singer from 1927, where there's also a person in a leadership position in the community who starts dating someone who isn't Jewish. Don't get me wrong, I also love calling basically everything a modern retelling of The Jazz Singer, but there are some distinct differences between The Jazz Singer and this show, which I have to mention. The first is that in The Jazz Singer, his parents don't really accept him, his father definitely not, and his mother not until the very end of the story. And so he gets kicked out of his house and his community and ends up living a secular lifestyle by the end of it. In this show, Noah is pretty much accepted by his family, even though there's some tension. He stays connected to his Jewishness and remains a rabbi. But a deeper critique of the show itself comes to us from the end of this season, where Noah's sister-in-law is talking to Joanne and telling her that she's basically already Jewish because, she's cozy and she likes to be a yenta and to complain about things. And that's basically what makes her Jewish.
So keep doing Shabbat. You're basically Jewish. I wish. No, Joanne, I'm serious. I feel like you have this idea of being Jewish that's so much more complicated than it actually is. I mean, you feel Jewish to me. You're warm and cozy. You always want to chat about everything. You'd be a pretty good get for us. I mean, you're a true kibitzer. You're always getting in everybody's business. You ever heard of a yenta, Joanne? That's you. You're a yenta.
I'm a yenta.
Yeah, of course you are. I mean, you're obsessed with your family, even though they are so nuts. Jewish. You're always eating the challah before you're supposed to. We all do that. Jewish. I don't really know what you're waiting for. The whole thing is just a feeling. And enjoying all those little things is the feeling.
And understandably, people took issue with this. For example, there's this podcast episode with Miriam Anzovin and Eitan Levine where they discuss this very point. And they mentioned that in the show, the Jewishness is simply about cultural idiosyncrasies. It's just vibes. There's no deeper substance there. Now, on this channel, we like to talk about Jewish vibes. That's what Yiddishkeit means, by the way. But I like to think that on this channel, it's grounded in something a little deeper, in historical context, in reference to actual texts. So I'm curious to hear what you thought about this show. It was very controversial, a lot of hot takes. And if you're interested in hearing the full comments from the two videos I mentioned, they're linked beneath this video, so you can go check it out. In this show, Noah's mother is played by Tova Feldshuh, which takes us to the next item on our list, which is a short film called Malka. I want to give a shout out to my friend Zach, who put me on to this film, which we saw together at the Actors Temple in the city. This movie is based on the life of the grandmother of the creator of this film, named Seth Bison Hirsch, who is played by Tova Feldshuh, as we mentioned, and the both of them, among other creators of this film, spoke on a panel after the screening. The film begins at a family meal on a holiday where everyone's sitting together, but then it turns into this flashback where we meet the younger version of Malka. But what's interesting is that as the story progresses, the timelines become mixed together, and we begin to see how the two Malkas begin to interact with each other, and as well as the two perspectives become mixed, both of the younger Malka during the Holocaust, as well as the older Malka, who is now a grandmother in America. This was a really lovely film. It had so many surrealist and musical elements to it. I really hope that it gets developed into a feature-length film, and I really hope that you get a chance to see it as well, which is why I recommend following this film on Instagram if you want to get updates on what's happening with it. Speaking of Zach and short films, this takes me to the next item on the list, which is a short film called The First Year, which was created by Zach Greenberger, who, in addition to being a dear friend, is also an incredible writer. The story follows a newlywed couple, Yaakov and Brindy, who come from the yeshivish world, which Zach and I come from. The film wrestles with a central question, which is, how do you know if someone is your bashert? This is an idea in Judaism that before you're born, God decides who your marriage partner is supposed to be, and that you're destined to marry that person. And so the question, which is posed by Brindy, is, what is it supposed to feel like? The thing that I truly love about this short film is how realistically it portrays this interior struggle that these questions can pose. And I would say that this is the feature of Zach's writing, where he's able to paint the world in shades of gray, as opposed to painting the world in black and white, which is how we were raised. And something which Zach and I both really want to see is an accurate portrayal of the subculture which we come from, which is yeshivish Judaism. Now, as you know, on this channel, one of the biggest pet peeves, like the number one sin a movie can do, is portray Orthodox Jews by having curly payas that are attached to a hat that has the pointed front, the knetch. Simply just doesn't exist in reality. And that's regarding Hasidic Jews, who are much more visibly distinct. And so accurately portraying yeshivish Jews is even more rare. There's something about portraying the very real internal struggles of what it means to be a human paired with an accurate portrayal of yeshivish Jews that is so niche and rare, and this movie absolutely freaking nails it. So hopefully you get a chance to see this short film for yourself, whether it's at a festival or whether it streams online. I'll definitely be letting you know how you can go check it out. And I'd also recommend following this film on Instagram as well, so you can get updates from Zach himself. Speaking of accurately portraying yeshivish Judaism, this takes me to the next item on the list, which is an Israeli show called Shababnikim, or its English title, The New Black. I also want to give a shout out to my friend Rafi, who told me about this show for the first time, and we actually saw this show together, and the third season aired this year, and the finale just aired last week in the United States. The show follows a group of 4 young men who are in a yeshiva in Jerusalem, a rabbinic seminary, where they're known by the adults in their life as the Shababnikim, which is this Hebrew Arabic slang for slackers, for dropouts, basically Orthodox bad boys. So each season poses a central question that these students have to face. And along the way, there are so many incredibly niche cultural references that I feel like just me and my friends are the only ones who can understand them. The show opens with a central question.
מה הדרך החינוכי הנכונה?
שואלים אותי שוב ושוב, מהי הדרך החינוכית הנכונה?
What is the proper way that the rabbis in this yeshiva should be leading these young men into adulthood in the Orthodox world? Is it through the hug or through the hammer?
חנוך לנער על פי דרכו, או כפה עליו הר כגיגית?
And the question posed is, if someone decides to go on a ski trip, should he be kicked out of yeshiva for that, or should the rabbis be understanding? And so throughout the first season, this question is personified by 2 different rabbis who try to get control of the yeshiva, and the Shababnikim are kind of caught in between and are up to their own schemes and whatnot. But by the end of the first season, they have no choice but to head out on their own, which leads to the big question of the second season, which is it possible to live between 2 worlds? If you've been a viewer of this channel for any duration of time, then you probably know that this is a question that I love to talk about. To me, this is the central question of Jewishness in the modern age. In fact, we recently did a video where we talked about this very question as it applied to the movie The Jazz Singer from 1927, which we mentioned earlier in our list by Nobody Wants This. In this show, the way the question is posed is it possible to truly be modern Orthodox, or do you end up resorting to just one of those 2 categories? On one side, we have Gedalia, who affirms that he believes it's not possible to live this synthesized version of reality. Instead, he chooses to remain squarely in the yeshivish world. The other side is held by Avinoam, who explains his position in probably one of the most important lines in the show, where he says that he doesn't just want to be an observer of the modern world, but a participant.
תראה, גדליה, אני רוצה להגיד לך משהו. כן. אתה יכול להתבדל. זה הכי נוח. להיות סגור לבד בתוך חדר, ללמוד תירי כל היום, אבל אני לא. אני רוצה להיות חלק מהסיפור פה, חלק מה שקורה כאן, אני לא רוצה להיות צופה מהצד.
And so all of this tension comes to a head in this, the final season of the show, where we explore the idea of individuality, where it looks at how the characters are trying to become their own person, independent of their parents and the yeshiva. Without giving too much away about the ending, what I will say is that the point it makes was really beautiful, and I really appreciated it, which was that in moments of crisis, it's the Shababnikim, the dropouts, the misfits, that end up being perfectly suited to helping people out in those type of moments. Overall, there is so much to be said about this show. Honestly, this video right now is not going to do it justice. I have to return and do an in-depth take on it. But in the meantime, you should definitely catch up on the show if you haven't seen it yet, and you could stream it on HiFlix. There's another movie that also captures this tension of growing up in a very traditional world, which is the next item on our list, called SHTTL. It was actually released in 2022, but it's been on a festival run for a few years now, and it started its theatrical release this past year in 2025 here in New York, and it's actually continuing in Los Angeles. The story follows a young man named Mendel who returns to his small town called a shtetl after having gone to pursue a career in filmmaking in the big city. And he returns on what is unknown to him and everyone else in the story, the day before the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union. And so we get to see the shtetl in its final moments, at its pinnacle, where we can see the height of all the different tensions that were playing out over the decades before. And like all classic Jewish stories in the modern age, we can see the main character navigating between two worlds on several different fronts, whether it's traditional Judaism versus secularization, the big city versus the small town, communism versus fascism. There were several moments that really spoke to me. They were very emotional. One of them in particular was this moment where Mendel is speaking to the rabbi of the synagogue, and they're discussing his experience with Jewishness. That really hit home. And as a side point, the shul itself, in which they're having this conversation, is an incredibly accurate recreation of what those old wooden shuls look like in the shtetl, as well as the depiction of Jewishness in this film is very accurate. I saw this film with both Rafi and Zach, and I think you should too. So if you're in New York or Los Angeles, you should definitely check out the showtimes on Menemsha Films website, which is linked beneath the video. So I want to shift gears a little bit and move away from stories that talk about the experience of Jewishness and more about how it's perceived, which takes us to the next item on the list, caught stealing. We actually covered this movie in the episode of Yiddish Akina Club right before this one, and this movie is about a guy named Hank who gets caught in between all these different criminals who converge on him because they assume he has this money from the sale of drugs. And included in this list of criminals are these two Hasidic brothers, Lipa and Shmuley, known as the Hebrews. So if you're interested in a much deeper breakdown of this film, I recommend going to check out the episode we did on this film where we talk about the Jewishness of the director, Darren Aronofsky, as well as the historical context for tough Jews. We also bring up some true crime stories that shed some light on the characters in this film, as well as some of the inconsistencies of the characters in this movie, particularly how they eat a Shabbos meal at the wrong time. But upon leaving the theater after seeing Caught Stealing, I had this feeling that I wonder if you think is correct, so I want to share it with you. I think just like the 70s, 80s, and 90s are seen as kind of a golden age for Italian-American crime films, I feel like the 2010s and the 2020s have seen so many different Jewish crime films. In the 2010s, there was, of course, Alfie Solomons on the show Peaky Blinders. The show Boardwalk Empire gave us several Jewish criminals, as well as the movies we mentioned last time are Holy Rollers and Triple Nine. And so far, the 2020s have given us Uncut Gems, as well as the cousin in the show Unorthodox, who is a bit of a tough Jew himself. This movie, Caught Stealing, as well as the next two items on the list. The first of which is a movie called Guns and Moses. So, funny story, I actually first learned about this movie from a poster I saw on a construction site. And I think it's the first time in my life that one of those signs actually yielded something worthwhile. This movie has been on a festival run itself and is now streaming online. So the movie opens at an award ceremony that happens in a Jewish community in the high desert of California. And as the man who is being honored gets up to speak, he gets shot and killed. At first, the cops arrest this guy who is part of these anti-Semitic chat rooms online, but the rabbi begins to suspect that they arrested the wrong guy. And so as the rabbi investigates what's going on, several other people get killed along the way. And so this prompts the rabbi to rise to this occasion and become, wait for it, a tough Jew. There's also several moments where they totally nail the Jewishness, particularly where the rabbi is explaining his ideology about why he feels prompted to rise to the occasion, where he quotes the Talmudic saying, "B'makom she'ein ish, hishtadel liyais ish."
Hillel said, in a place where there is no man, be the man.
This movie is also filled with a bunch of famous faces. For example, the Doc from Back to the Future is in this movie where he plays a Holocaust survivor. The man who got shot at the award ceremony is played by Dermot Mulroney, who I've seen in the show Shameless. And the mayor in this movie is played by Neil McDonough, who I first saw, embarrassingly enough, in the show Arrow. This movie is created by a man named Salvador Litvak, who also created one of my favorite Jewish movies called When Do We Eat?, which is all about a Passover Seder. In fact, the Passover episode for Yiddish Kino Club, like the first half of it is When Do We Eat? In both movies, Litvak absolutely nails the Jewish representations in terms of accuracy. And in this movie, the rabbi is implied to be Chabad, and his outfit is pretty good. But instead of having the Mashiach sticker, he ends up having a Thank You Hashem sticker on his Honda Odyssey. There was also a few Jewish songs sprinkled in throughout this film, which were actually pretty accurate and real songs that I know, so that was really cool to see. There's also this moment towards the end of the movie where the rabbi and his crew are waiting to be attacked, and in order to raise their spirits, he sings this song called the Berditchever Melody, which not only is accurate, but it just fit the moment so perfectly. It was like, whoa, if I was writing a movie, that would be something I would do. It was so good and literal chills.
What is that?
My dad's great-great-grandfather wrote it. 6 grades. I'm named after him. If you sing it when you're in trouble, he fights for you up there.
Yeah?
All right, so let's look at the other example of tough Jews that came out this past year, which is a movie called Yaniv. I had a chance to see this film at Greenpoint Shul, where there was a panel with the creators and some actors afterwards, which was moderated by Leah Gottfried, who is the creator of the web series Soon by You. This movie is about a teacher named Bernstein who normally puts on a production with his students every single year, but this year, the principal, who's played by Catherine Curtin, Meg's mom from Bad Shabbos, she cuts the budget, which leads Bernstein to try to find a different way to raise money for the school production. And so after his grandfather lets him know that there's this underground Hasidic gambling operation, Bernstein and his coworker, who we learn is a gambling addict, end up enlisting the help of his grandfather to dress them up as Hasidic Jews so they can slip into this underground gambling operation and make some money.
I've been waiting to use these babies for years. Here we go. I always tell them, you don't choose to pay us. The pay us choose you.
Now, what was interesting about the panel was that the creators mentioned that when they showed this film to Jews around the world, it brought them a lot of comfort, particularly with the turbulent events of the past couple years. Now, the thing is that the depiction of Orthodox Jews in this movie is not very accurate. And frankly, the only reason why Bernstein and his coworkers are able to blend into the Hasidic world is because their costumes are literally indistinguishable from the actual Hasidim in the story, which I guess says a lot about the accuracy of how Orthodoxy was depicted. There was a funny moment, I have to mention, where they're trying to slip into this underground operation, and there's like a security guard doing a check, and he's like, wait a second, what are these? Are these milking pretzels? This is a fleishig establishment. You're saying good. Say better. Which means, We get it that the creators took some creative liberties, but as someone that comes from that world, that went to yeshiva schools and Hasidic synagogues and summer camps, we want to see a representation of our world that is slightly more accurate than a Halloween outlet store. But either way, I'm curious what you think. Does this support my theory that we're seeing a surge of depictions of tough Jews who are gun-toting, drug-smuggling, and gamblers? And is that good or bad? What do you think? Now, before we come to an end here on this list, I do need to mention a couple of things. First off, something that you won't see on this list is a show called Long Story Short, which many of you actually recommended under the Yom Kippur episode of Yiddish Kino Club. And it's not for any negative reason, it's just that I simply haven't had a chance to see it yet. I actually considered whether or not I should cram it in before I make this video, like I'm studying for a test or something, but I decided not to do that and to just give this show the proper attention that it deserves and get to it in due time. Perhaps we'll cover it for next Yom Kippur. The other thing that isn't on this list are things that have to do with the war in Israel, like the movie October 8 or the show One Day in October. And this is because, first off, I haven't seen them yet either, so I want to get to them. But second of all, it has to do with something deeper, which is the fact that I'm really nervous to talk about my feelings about Israel. I think the reason for that is I've spent the past 6 years thinking about Jewishness in the modern world and Jewishness in America, two topics that are very closely related. And I've spent those 6 years thinking and writing and discussing and just working through all these issues. And so I feel much more confident to present them publicly, which is something that I haven't done for this issue of Israel. And so even though Jewishness in the modern age is extremely complex, as we've mentioned, it's constantly trapped between two worlds. To me, my relationship with Israel, especially during the past few years with the war that was going on, feels infinitely more complex. And it's something that I'm still working through on my personal side. And so I don't really feel ready to talk about it publicly. But the truth is, that's something that I want to change, which is why I'm mentioning it here right now. I want to be able to talk about my feelings about it without having to be definitive. I want to be able to bring all of you into my thought process without having to feel like it's the final word on the subject. And so to do that, to start that process right now, I want to tell you about an essay that I've been working on for a number of months, which is about my experience learning the book of Joshua, Sefer Yoshua, in depth, both with traditional commentaries and modern contemporary commentators online, and how that experience gave me a framework which allowed me to understand the situation in Israel over the past few years. And so speaking of biblical stuff like the book of Joshua, this takes us to the final item on the list, a show which I saw this year called The House of David. This show, which is currently in its second season, is on Amazon Prime, and it follows the story of King David from the Bible. In the first season, we follow the story of Saul, how he failed to kill his enemy, King Agag, which ends up haunting him, and the season ends with the famous story of David slaying the giant Goliath. What's interesting about this show is that it sticks to the broad plot points that are given to us in Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, but what it does is it takes creative liberties as to how the characters get to those points. What is their motivation? What is going on behind the scenes? As well as giving a lot of characters who the Bible doesn't really talk about, it just mentions they exist. It gives them a lot of personality. For example, we can see how the Philistine king ends up making an alliance with Goliath in order to get him to fight the Israelites, which was really interesting. What's interesting is that the show tries to sprinkle in little bits of Hebrew throughout it. The characters all refer to God in different ways depending on their perspective. So the more devout characters like David and Jonathan refer to God as Hashem, which is how Orthodox Jews refer to God. And in this season, there's also a moment where Jonathan is putting on tefillin, which I thought was pretty random, but pretty cool. And so the second season is still airing, and eventually I'm going to have to return to this show and give a full breakdown. But if you're interested in hearing the Jewish take on this show, I recommend a podcast called Judaism Demystified, where in one episode, their guest, Olivia Friedman, does an incredible job comparing and contrasting the show to traditional Jewish lore called Medrash. Besides being a beautifully cinematic piece of art, this show also captures the dynamic between the Israelites on one side and the Philistines and the Amalekites on the other side, something which has downstream effects all the way till today in our modern geopolitics. But that, my friends, is a story for another time. In the meantime, I want to thank you for being here with me to the end of this video. And if you're interested in other Jewish movies, then you can check out the other episodes of our Jewish film club called Yiddish Kino Club. And if you're interested in Jewish vibes, then you, my friend, you're in the right place. My name is David, and welcome to Yiddishkeit.